You think you can tell me how to run a my store? The laugh that followed wasn't polite. It wasn't the kind of chuckle you get when someone says something mildly amusing. No, this was the kind of laugh designed to humiliate. The kind meant to put someone in their place. And every single person inside Harrington's Electronics heard it. Customers stopped browsing. A woman holding a phone charger turned to look. A man near the television display paused mid-step. All eyes locked onto the front counter where Frank Harrington stood behind his register, gold watch catching the light, arms crossed over his chest, staring down at a 17-year-old black kid holding a worn notebook against his chest like it was the only thing protecting him. The boy didn't flinch, didn't argue, didn't walk away. He just stood there, waiting. And that patience, that quiet, unshakable stillness, it would cost Frank Harrington everything he had built, because the 17-year-old had been watching stores like this one fail for years, and he knew exactly why Harrington's Electronics was dying. Let me tell you about Frank Harrington, 62 years old, gray hair cropped short and neat, the kind of man who wore pressed shirts to his own store because he believed appearance meant authority. He had a gold watch he liked to flash when shaking hands with suppliers, a firm grip he held just a little too long, and a smile that never quite reached his eyes. Frank had inherited Harrington's Electronics from his father back in 1987, 37 years ago. He never let anyone forget it. My father built this place from nothing. He'd tell anyone who'd listen. 3 generations of Harringtons, serving this community. What he didn't mention was that when he took over, the store was nearly bankrupt. What he didn't mention was that someone else had saved it. Someone whose name Frank Harrington hadn't spoken aloud in over 20 years. But we'll get to that. The store itself sat on the corner of Jefferson Avenue and Maple Street. Red brick exterior, faded awning. The same sign his father had hung in 1962, now weathered and cracked. Inside, the air smelled like dust and old carpet cleaner. Rows of television flickered silently along one wall. Shelves of phone accessories and small appliances filled the center aisles. Most of them hadn't been rearranged in years. Jefferson Avenue had seen better days, too. Back in the late 1980s, this street was alive. Record shops, family diners, department stores where parents brought their children on Saturday afternoons. Now, most of those storefronts were empty. Brown paper covering the windows. Faded for-lease signs nobody bothered to take down. Harrington's Electronics was one of the last survivors. But survival isn't the same as thriving. Frank Harrington believed in hierarchy. He believed that experience mattered more than ideas. He believed that some people belonged in certain spaces, and some people didn't. He could spot serious customers the moment they walked through the door. Or so he thought, because on that Friday afternoon in early March, Frank Harrington looked at the teenager standing near his counter and he saw nothing. Just another kid with nowhere to be. He had no idea what was coming. No idea that this boy carried something Frank had tried to bury decades ago. Frank had run this place for nearly 40 years. In all that time, only one person had ever challenged how he did business. That person had been dealt with. The name of that person, Frank hadn't heard it spoken aloud in over 2 decades. He was about to hear it again. Marcus Wright was 17 years old. Tall, thin, with the kind of posture that comes from years of making yourself smaller, of folding into corners, of learning that sometimes the safest thing to do is take up as little space as possible. He wore a faded navy hoodie, clean, but clearly worn, the cuffs slightly frayed, the zipper pull missing. Under his arm, he carried a black spiral notebook. The cover was soft from years of handling, the edges rounded, pages sticking out at odd angles. He had been standing near the counter for almost 10 minutes, waiting, watching the line of customers slowly thin. A woman paying for a television mount, a man asking about warranty coverage, an older couple debating which cable to buy. Marcus waited through all of it, patient, invisible. Customers walked past him without a second glance. One woman actually stepped around him like he was a store display. Frank Harrington noticed him, of course. But Frank had already made his assessment. Another kid killing time, probably waiting for a friend, maybe hoping to use the bathroom without buying anything. Not a serious person, not worth attention. When the line finally cleared, Marcus stepped forward. His voice was calm, respectful, quiet but clear. "Excuse me, sir. I had an idea about your front display." Frank didn't look up from his register. His fingers kept tapping on the keys. "Son, I don't need a sales pitch." "I'm not selling anything," Marcus said. "I just noticed." That's when Frank looked up, really looked, and laughed. Not a small laugh, not a polite chuckle. A full, loud, dismissive laugh that echoed through the store. Heads turned. The couple browsing phone chargers stopped and stared. A man near the back looked up from the laptop display. Frank shook his head, still laughing. "An idea? About MY store." Marcus's grip tightened on his notebook, but his voice stayed steady. "Yes, sir. The accessories by the entrance. The ones that haven't been selling. I think there's a way." Frank cut him off. "Let me guess." He leaned forward on the counter, that gold watch catching the light. "You took a business class at school, right?" "No, sir." "Watched some video online? Some influencer telling you how to flip products?" "No." Frank spread his hands wide. "Then what? You just know how to run a retail store better than someone who's been doing it for 40 years. Marcus paused. He could feel the eyes on him, the judgment, the amusement at his expense. But he didn't back down. "I know you've been doing this a long time," he said quietly. "That's why I thought you might want to hear what I noticed." Frank's smile disappeared. His voice went flat. "This isn't a school project fair, son. This is a real business, with real money and real experience." He pointed toward the door. "Whatever idea you've got, save it for your homework." A few customers exchanged uncomfortable glances. One woman looked at the floor. Nobody said anything. Nobody stood up for the kid being humiliated in front of them. Marcus stood there for a long moment, his jaw tight, his notebook pressed against his chest, the weight of every dismissal he'd ever experienced pressing down on his shoulders. But he didn't leave. "Not yet. Can I just show you?" he asked. "One thing. It'll take 5 minutes." Frank stared at him. Something flickered across his face. Annoyance. Maybe curiosity. Or maybe just a desire to humiliate this kid completely before sending him on his way. Marcus Wright had spent his entire childhood inside stores just like this one. Watching. Learning. Waiting for a moment exactly like this. To understand Marcus Wright, you have to understand where he came from. Not just the neighborhood. Not just the school. But the education no classroom could ever provide. Marcus's mother was named Elaine Wright, 51 years old. Hands rough from decades of work. A woman who had held 3 jobs at once more times than she could count. For most of Marcus's childhood, Elaine cleaned offices in retail stores across the city. Banks after they closed at 6. Law firms before they opened at 8. And retail spaces on Jefferson Avenue when the shops locked their doors for the night. She couldn't afford childcare. Couldn't leave Marcus home alone when he was young. So she brought him with her, night after night, store after store. While Elaine mopped floors and wiped down counters, Marcus sat on overturned buckets in the corner. Quiet, invisible, but watching, always watching. He watched which aisles customers avoided during the day. He noticed which shelves stayed full week after week. He saw the products people picked up, examined, and put back down. He observed how people moved through spaces, where their eyes went first when they entered. What made them stop? What made them walk faster? By the time Marcus was 10, he could predict which items would sell out by Friday. By 12, he was sketching layouts in that black notebook, rearranging stores in his mind, testing theories nobody asked him to test. By 15, he could walk into almost any retail space and identify 3 problems within 60 seconds. Problems the owners had been staring at for years without seeing. But Marcus had learned something else during those long nights. Something just as important as retail psychology. He learned that people don't like being corrected, especially by someone they don't respect. He watched his mother, watched how store managers spoke to her, how they looked through her, how they gave orders without ever learning her name. Elaine Wright was invisible to them, just another person who cleaned up their messes. And Marcus, he was even more invisible. The kid in the corner, not worth noticing, not worth listening to. He learned that in places like Harrington's Electronics, respect wasn't given freely. It was hoarded, protected, kept away from people who looked like him, people who came from where he came from. He learned to stay quiet, to observe without commenting, to know things without saying them. Until today. Today, something made him speak up. Maybe it was a notebook feeling heavy in his hands lately. Maybe it was the pages in the back he'd never fully understood. Pages written in handwriting that wasn't his father's handwriting. Daniel Wright had given Marcus that notebook before he died. Marcus was 12 years old. His father was too sick to explain what it all meant. Just pressed the notebook into Marcus's hands and said, "Someday you'll understand." For 5 years, Marcus had carried it everywhere, reading his own notes, adding to them. But those pages in the back, the ones with his father's small, precise handwriting, he'd never been able to make sense of them. Until recently, until he started recognizing patterns, methods, ideas that looked familiar because he'd been developing them himself, without knowing where they came from. There was something else in that notebook, something Marcus didn't fully understand yet. Notes that weren't written in his handwriting, pages in the back he'd never been able to read. Until now. Frank Harrington sighed. It was a theatrical sigh, loud enough for the customers nearby to hear. He looked around the store with an expression that said, "Can you believe this, kid?" A few people smiled uncomfortably. One man shook his head. Frank was enjoying this now. The attention, the audience, the chance to teach this boy a lesson about knowing his place. He pointed toward the front of the store. Near the entrance, there was a small table, cluttered, disorganized, covered with mismatched phone cases, portable chargers with outdated packaging, and Bluetooth speakers that had been sitting there so long they'd gathered a thin layer of dust. "You see that display?" Frank said loudly. Marcus looked. "Those items don't sell," Frank continued. "Haven't moved in over a year. I've tried everything. Different prices, different placement, signs, promotions. Nothing works." He paused for effect. "You want to impress me with your ideas." He spread his hands wide. "Here's your chance." The store went quiet. Customers stopped pretending to browse. Everyone was watching now. Frank leaned forward. "If you can do anything, just O-N-E trick, to make customers buy from that table today." He smiled. "I'll listen to whatever you have to say. I'll give you 5 whole minutes of my time." Marcus said nothing. Frank's smile widened. "But if you can't? If that table stays exactly the same?" He pointed toward the door. "You walk out, and you don't come back bothering my customers. Faye." A long pause. The woman with the phone charger was watching. The man near the televisions had moved closer. Even the older couple had stopped their debate about cables. Marcus looked at the neglected table, looked at the dusty products nobody wanted, looked at Frank Harrington's smug, satisfied face. He could walk away, save himself the humiliation, come back another day, or never come back at all. But something in him refused to retreat. Something his father had left behind. A voice that said, show them what you know." Marcus nodded. One small nod. "Okay." Frank blinked. He hadn't expected the kid to accept. "Okay," he repeated. "Okay," Marcus said again. "I'll do it." Frank laughed, but this time it sounded slightly less confident. "All right then." Clock's ticking. In the next 7 minutes, a secret buried on Jefferson Avenue for over 20 years would come back to life. Marcus didn't rush. That was the first thing people noticed. He didn't run to the table and start grabbing products. He didn't look around frantically for ideas. He didn't ask Frank for suggestions or permission. He just walked slowly toward the front of the store and stopped about 6 feet from the table. He stood there, watching. Customers glanced at each other. Someone whispered, "What's he doing?" Frank crossed his arms, that smug smile returning. Any day now. Marcus ignored him. He was watching the entrance, watching how people came through the door. Their eyes would move left first, toward the television wall, the big screens, the bright displays. Their eyes would sweep right, past the table, always past. They didn't stop, didn't pause, didn't even slow down. The table was invisible to them. Marcus understood why. The products were arranged neatly. Too neatly. Everything in perfect rows. Perfect alignment. The human eye was drawn to disruption, to things that didn't quite fit. When everything looked the same, nothing stood out. The brain processed it as background noise and moved on. But that wasn't the only problem. Marcus watched 3 more customers enter. Same pattern. Eyes left. Eyes right. Past the table. Gone. The product themselves weren't the issue. Phone chargers. Portable batteries. Bluetooth speakers. People needed these things. But they weren't stopping to consider them. Something was creating a barrier. An invisible wall between customers and products. Marcus stepped closer to the table. Looked at the price tags. Reasonable. Looked at the packaging. Slightly dated, but acceptable. He looked at the arrangement again. And he saw it. The product were grouped by type. All the chargers together. All the speakers together. All the batteries together. Logical. Orderly. And completely wrong. When everything looks like a choice, people freeze. Too many similar options create decision fatigue. The brain protects itself by choosing nothing. Marcus turned to Frank. Can I move 3 items? Frank waved his hand dismissively. Knock yourself out. Marcus reached for the table. He picked up 1 phone charger, moved it to the opposite side of the table. Alone, separated from the others. He picked up 1 Bluetooth speaker, turned the box sideways instead of facing forward. The angle broke the perfect pattern, created visual disruption. Finally, he picked up 1 portable battery, placed it slightly lower than everything else. Just an inch, just enough to catch the eye. 3 items, 3 moves, less than 30 seconds. Frank laughed again. That's IT. Marcus wasn't finished. He tore a single page from his notebook, pulled a pen from his pocket, and wrote 4 words in neat block letters. Most returned, until today. He taped the paper above the table. Stepped back. Frank stared at the sign. Most returned. He shook his head. You're telling people products are bad. Marcus didn't answer. He just stood there, watching, waiting. In exactly 94 seconds, Frank Harrington would understand why his father had warned him about a man named Daniel Wright. The first customer came through the door about a minute later. A woman in her 40s. Professional clothes. Quick, purposeful steps. Her eyes went left first. Televisions. Right. Past the table. She stopped. Stepped back. Read the sign. Most returned. Until today. Her brow furrowed. Curiosity. That's what Marcus had counted on. Most retailers tried to hide their problems. They never admitted that products had issues. Never acknowledged returns or complaints. But humans are naturally curious about problems. About stories. About things that used to be wrong but are now fixed. The sign didn't say bestseller. It didn't say great deal. It told a story. These products were returned. A lot. But today, something changed. The customer's brain wanted to know, what changed? She picked up the charger Marcus had moved, the one sitting alone, separated from the others. Easy to see, easy to grab, no decision fatigue. She turned it over, examined the packaging. A man walked up behind her, young, maybe late 20s. He looked at the sign, looked at the charger in her hands. Those any good? She shrugged. I don't know, but now I'm curious. He laughed, picked up the Bluetooth speaker, the one turned sideways, the one that broke the pattern and caught his eye. It says they fixed whatever was wrong, he said. They didn't know that Marcus had written those words 60 seconds ago. They assumed there was a story, a reason, a solution. Within 2 minutes, both of them were walking toward the counter, products in hand. Frank Harrington's mouth opened, closed. Another customer entered, an older man. He saw the first 2 heading to the register with items from that table. Social proof. If they are buying, it must be worth it. He walked to the table, picked up the portable battery, the one placed slightly lower. Eye-catching. Different. Within 5 minutes, the table was empty. Not low on stock. Empty. 7 customers stood at the counter, holding products Frank hadn't sold in over a year, waiting to pay. The store fell silent. Nobody was laughing now. Nobody was smirking. Frank Harrington stood behind his register, processing payments, his face completely blank, color slowly draining, his hands moving mechanically, scanning, bagging, but his eyes kept drifting back to Marcus, to the teenager standing quietly near the front, notebook under his arm, no expression of triumph, no gloating, just that same patient stillness, watching, waiting. The last customer walked out with their purchase. The table was empty. The impossible had happened. This was never really about phone charges. It was about something Frank Harrington had stolen, and someone he had destroyed. The store was quiet now. Most of the customers had left. Just a few browsers remained, picking through the back aisles. Frank Harrington stood behind the counter. His hands were flat on the surface, pressing down like he needed to hold himself steady. Marcus hadn't moved. He was still near the entrance, where the table used to be full, where it was now completely bare. Frank cleared his throat. When he spoke, his voice was different, quieter. The showmanship was gone. Where did you learn that? Marcus looked at him. Learn what? That technique, the sign, the arrangement. Frank gestured vaguely at the empty table. That's not something they teach in school. That's not something you find online. He paused. So where did you learn it? Marcus was quiet for a moment. He thought about his mother, about the stores she cleaned, about the buckets he sat on, about the years of watching and learning and staying invisible. My dad! The air in the store changed. Frank's body went rigid. His fingers curled against the counter. Your dad! It wasn't a question. More like he was repeating it to himself, testing the words. What was his name? Marcus frowned slightly, confused by the intensity in Frank's voice. Daniel Wright. 3 syllables, 2 words, and Frank Harrington went completely still. His face turned to stone. No more fake smile. No more performative confidence. Just recognition. And something else. Something that looked almost like fear. Marcus saw it. The way Frank's hand trembled. Just slightly. The way his eyes wouldn't quite meet Marcus's. The way he suddenly seemed older. Smaller. That's interesting. Frank's voice was strained. Forced casual. Well, you've made your point. You can go now, son. He turned away. Started straightening things on the counter that didn't need straightening. We're getting busy. I've got customers to help. The store was nearly empty. There were no customers waiting. Marcus didn't move. Did you know him? Frank's hand stopped moving. What? My father. Did you know him? A long pause. Frank still wouldn't turn around. I knew a lot of people back then. Jefferson Avenue was different. More businesses. More people. He waved his hand dismissively. I can't remember everyone. But Marcus had seen his reaction. The trembling hand. The stone face. The fear. Frank Harrington remembered. He remembered very well. I should go, Marcus said quietly. He walked toward the door, paused with his hand on the handle. Thank you for the opportunity, Mr. Harrington. He left. The door swung shut behind him. Frank Harrington stood alone in his store, staring at the empty table, his hands still shaking. Marcus didn't know why Frank Harrington was afraid. He was about to find out that his father hadn't failed 20 years ago. He had been erased. That night, Marcus sat alone in his bedroom. The house was quiet. His mother was working her second shift. Wouldn't be home until after midnight. The black notebook lay open on his bed. Marcus had gone through it hundreds of times over the years. His own notes filled most of the pages. Store layouts he'd sketched. Observations about customer behavior. Theories about product placement. Ideas he developed watching his mother work. But in the back of the notebook, there were other pages. Older pages. The paper slightly yellowed. The handwriting different. Smaller. More precise. His father's handwriting. Marcus had always known those pages were there. He'd tried to read them before. But the notes were dense, technical, full of abbreviations and references he didn't understand. Tonight, though, something was different. After what happened at Harrington's Electronics, Marcus looked at those pages with new eyes, and he started to recognize things, methods he developed on his own, Techniques he thought he'd invented. They were all there, in his father's handwriting, written years before Marcus was born. He stared at one page for a long time. A diagram of a store layout, arrows showing customer flow, notes about visual disruption, about psychological triggers, about the power of curiosity over persuasion. The same principles Marcus had used that afternoon at Frank Harrington's store. His hands were shaking when he picked up his phone. He dialed his mother's number. It rang 4 times before she answered. Her voice was tired. "Baby, everything okay?" Marcus hesitated. "Mom, I need to ask you something." "What is it?" He took a breath. Did Dad ever work for Harrington's Electronics? Silence on the other end. Long, heavy. He could hear his mother breathing. "Mom, why are you asking me that?" Her voice had changed. Careful, guarded. "Because I was there today, at the store, and when I told the owner Dad's name, he looked scared." More silence, a sound Marcus hadn't heard since his father's funeral. His mother crying, soft at first, harder. "Mom? Mom, what's wrong?" I can't talk about this over the phone." Her voice was breaking. "I'll be home in a few hours. We'll talk then." "But, please, Marcus, just wait for me. Please." She hung up. Marcus sat in his room, staring at his father's handwriting, waiting. The hours crawled by. Every minute felt like 10. He tried to read more of his father's notes, tried to piece together what they meant, but his mind kept drifting back to Frank Harrington's face, the fear in his eyes, the trembling hands, the desperate attempt to act casual. Something terrible had happened between his father and that man, something that still haunted Frank Harrington 20 years later. When Elaine Wright finally came home, her eyes were red. She had been crying the entire drive. She sat down across from her son at the kitchen table, took his hands in hers, and told him the truth. "He stole from your father, Marcus, Frank Harrington. He took everything your father built. And when your dad tried to speak up..." She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. No one listened. Elaine Wright told her son everything that night. Why they moved, why she worked 3 jobs, why Daniel Wright's name had been erased from Jefferson Avenue, and why Marcus was the only one who could bring it back. Daniel Wright was born in 1961, grew up on the south side of the city, raised by a single mother who worked in a laundromat. He never went to college, couldn't afford it, but Daniel had a gift. He could see things other people couldn't. Patterns, connections, the invisible rules that govern human behavior. By his mid-20s, Daniel had taught himself retail psychology, not from books. There weren't many books about it back then. He learned by watching, by experimenting, by testing theories in real stores with real products. He noticed things nobody else noticed. Why certain products sold out while others gathered dust. Why customers walked faster in some aisles and slower in others. Why the same item could fail in one location and succeed in another. He developed methods, systematic approaches to store layout, display techniques based on human psychology, pricing strategies that didn't rely on discounts. And he started helping people. Small store owners on Jefferson Avenue. People who were struggling. People nobody else would help. Daniel never charged much. Sometimes he worked for free. He believed that if he helped the community would help him back. And for a while, it worked. Word spread about Daniel Wright, the man who could save a dying store, the man who understood why people bought things. By 1996, Daniel had helped over a dozen businesses on Jefferson Avenue, including Harrington's Electronics. Frank Harrington had just inherited the store from his father. He was 31 years old, arrogant, inexperienced, and completely lost. The store was failing. Sales were down 40%. Suppliers were threatening to cut them off. Frank's father had run the business for 30 years, but Frank didn't understand how. He was about to close the doors when someone recommended Daniel Wright. "He saved the record shop on 5th, they said. "He saved the diner on the corner. Maybe he can help you too." Frank was skeptical. Daniel didn't look like a consultant, didn't dress like one, didn't talk like one. But Frank was desperate. So he agreed to let Daniel take a look. What happened next changed both their lives. Daniel spent 2 weeks analyzing Harrington's electronics. He walked every aisle, watched every customer, studied every product. He filled 3 notebooks with observations. He presented Frank with a complete plan, a total redesign of the store, new layout, new displays, new pricing strategies, new customer flow. Frank implemented everything. Within 6 months, profits had doubled. Within a year, they had tripled. Harrington's Electronics became the most successful store on Jefferson Avenue. Frank Harrington became a respected businessman. And Daniel Wright became a threat. Because Frank realized something. If people found out that Daniel was responsible for his success, they would credit Daniel, not Frank. And Frank couldn't allow that. So he made a decision. He started claiming Daniel's ideas as his own. At first, it was subtle. A comment here, a brag there. I completely redesigned the store layout. I developed a new approach to customer psychology. I figured out what we were doing wrong. Daniel didn't notice at first. He was too busy helping other businesses, too focused on the work. By the time he realized what was happening, it was too late. Frank had registered several of Daniel's methods under his own name, filed paperwork claiming sole ownership, built a reputation as an innovator. When Daniel confronted him, Frank denied everything. These I am why ideas. I came up with them myself. You were just a consultant. You gave suggestions. I did the real work. If you try to say otherwise, I'll make sure no one believes you. Daniel didn't back down. He tried to fight, tried to prove what he had created, but he had no documentation. Frank had taken the original notebooks, claimed they were store property, and Daniel had no money for lawyers. So Frank used his connections, his reputation, his position. He spread rumors about Daniel Wright. He's unreliable. He exaggerates his contributions. He tried to steal credit for my work. One by one, the businesses on Jefferson Avenue stopped hiring Daniel. The same people he had helped for years suddenly wouldn't return his calls. Doors closed. Opportunities vanished. Within 2 years, Daniel Wright was completely blacklisted, driven out of the industry he had dedicated his life to. He never recovered. He took odd jobs, cleaning, maintenance, anything he could find. His health declined. His spirit broke. He died when Marcus was 12 years old. But before he died, he gave his son something. A black notebook filled with everything he knew, everything he had learned, everything Frank Harrington had stolen. Someday, Daniel told his son, you'll understand what to do with this. Daniel Wright had known something Frank Harrington didn't. He had made copies, and he had hidden them where his son would eventually find them. Marcus sat with his mother until after 2 in the morning, listening, asking questions, trying to understand. When she finally went to bed, exhausted and empty, Marcus stayed up. He opened his notebook again. Those pages in the back, his father's handwriting. Now he understood what he was looking at. These weren't just notes. They were proof, original concepts, dated entries, diagrams with timestamps. All of it created years before Frank Harrington claimed to have invented anything. But there was more. Tucked between the pages, folded so thin Marcus had never noticed them, were additional documents. Letters Daniel had written but never sent, addressed in newspapers, to business associations, to lawyers, explaining what Frank had done, documenting the theft, naming names. There was a journal, too, small entries, dated, describing what happened as it happened, the betrayal, the blacklisting, the slow destruction of his reputation. And there were names, not just Frank Harrington, other people, business owners who had looked the other way, people who had believed Frank's lies, or pretended to, people who had benefited from Daniel's silence. Marcus read everything, his hands shaking, his heart pounding. His father had known that one day someone would need this evidence, and he had preserved it, hidden it, waited. Your father gave you that notebook before he died. His mother's words echoed in his mind. He said someday you'd understand what to do with it. Marcus understood now. This wasn't just about proving Frank Harrington wrong. It wasn't about winning an argument in an electronics store. It was about justice, about restoration, about giving his father back the legacy that was stolen. And Marcus was the only one who could do it. He stayed up until sunrise, reading, planning, preparing. By the time his mother woke up, Marcus had made a decision. He was going back to Harrington's electronics. Not to prove himself, not to show off, but to confront Frank Harrington with the truth, to demand answers, to start the process of reclaiming what belonged to his father. What Marcus didn't know was that Frank Harrington had been awake all night too, pacing, worrying, making phone calls, and preparing a trap of his own. When Marcus returned to Harrington's electronics that Monday, he discovered that Frank Harrington wasn't just afraid. He was already making moves, planning to destroy the son the same way he had destroyed the father. Marcus walked back into Harrington's electronics. The same bell chimed above the door. The same flickering televisions lined the wall. The same dusty shelves filled the aisles with products that moved too slowly. But something was different. The atmosphere had changed. It took Marcus a moment to identify what it was. Then he realized Frank Harrington was watching him, not dismissively like before, not with amusement or contempt. He was watching the way you watch someone you consider dangerous, careful, calculating, cold. Frank stood behind the counter in the same position as Friday, but his posture was different, stiffer, more controlled. The fake smile was gone. In its place was something harder, more focused, more deliberate. "You came back," Frank said. Not a question, a statement of fact. Marcus nodded. "I wanted to talk more about what I showed you Friday." Frank's expression didn't change. "That's interesting, because I wanted to talk to you too." He gestured toward the back of the store. "In private, if you don't mind." Marcus hesitated. His father's training was always running in the background now. Observation, pattern recognition, reading situations before they fully developed. He noticed things. There was a man in a suit standing near the back office. Too still, too watchful, not browsing, not shopping, just standing there, observing. On Frank's desk, visible through the office window, there were papers, stacked neatly, official-looking, and the security camera near the entrance had been repositioned, angled differently than it was on Friday, pointed more directly at where the front table had been, the table that was now empty. Marcus filed these observations away. "Okay," he said. He followed Frank toward the back. The man in the suit stepped aside as they approached but didn't leave, didn't introduce himself, just watched with flat, professional eyes. Frank's office was small and cluttered, a desk covered with papers and old invoices, filing cabinets against one wall, drawers slightly open. A single chair for visitors, positioned lower than Frank's chair behind the desk. A power move. Make the visitor look up. Frank sat behind his desk, gestured for Marcus to take the chair. "So," Frank said, leaning back. "Friday was impressive." Marcus said nothing. "Seriously impressive. I've been in this business for 40 years. I've never seen anyone do what you did with that display." He shook his head slowly, which got me thinking. Maybe I was too quick to dismiss you, too quick to judge. A pause. "How would you like a job?" Marcus blinked. "A job? Part-time, flexible hours, work around your school schedule." Frank spread his hands magnanimously. "You clearly have a talent, a real gift. Why not put it to use? Here, officially, with pay." The offer hung in the air between them. Marcus looked at Frank's face. Search for the catch. It didn't take long to find it. Frank's eyes were too careful, his smile too calculated, his generosity too sudden. This wasn't an opportunity. It was a trap, a way to keep Marcus close. Control what he knew, control what he might say. Marcus had read his father's journals just hours ago. Frank Harrington had made the exact same offer to Daniel Wright 20 years ago. A job, a partnership, a chance to work together officially, right before destroying him completely. "Thank you," Marcus said carefully, "but I'm not looking for a job right now." Frank's smile flickered, just slightly, like a light bulb with a bad connection. "No? That's a shame. It's a good opportunity. Not many kids your age get offered something like this. I appreciate it, really, but I actually came to ask you something. Marcus leaned forward in the low chair. Did you know my father, Daniel Wright? Not just casually. Did you actually know him? The temperature in the room dropped. Frank's expression hardened like concrete setting. I told you on Friday. I knew a lot of people back then. But did you know him? Specifically, did you work with him? Silence stretched between them. Frank's jaw tightened visibly. Why are you really here, son? I want to know what happened 20 years ago, between you and my father. The mask cracked. Completely. Anger flashed across Frank's face. Raw, bitter, decades old. Your father, he said slowly, each word sharp as broken glass, was a thief. Marcus stiffened in his chair. Excuse me. You heard me. Frank's voice was ice-cold now. Daniel Wright was a thief and a liar. He tried to steal credit for MY work, MY ideas, MY innovations. When I called him out on it, he made up stories, tried to ruin my reputation, tried to destroy what I built. He shook his head with practiced disgust. I'm not surprised you don't know this. I'm sure your mother told you a very different version of events. Marcus's hands gripped the arms of his chair, his knuckles going white. That's not true. It's absolutely true. And apparently, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. Frank reached into his desk drawer, pulled out a folder, thick, official-looking. We reviewed the security footage from Friday. He opened the folder. Inside were printed images, screenshots from the store's security cameras, showing Marcus, at the front table, touching products, moving items, rearranging displays. Several items from that display are now missing from our inventory. Frank's voice was hard and flat. Care to explain? Marcus stared at the images, his own face looking back at him, his hands on the products. Missing? They sold. You saw them sell. Customers bought them. You rang them up yourself at the register. Did they? I have receipts for some items, but not all. Frank closed the folder. The store's inventory doesn't match our sales records. Items are unaccounted for, and you were the last person handling those products before they disappeared. Marcus understood now, with perfect, terrible clarity. This was the same play, the same strategy, the same playbook Frank had used 20 years ago. Frame someone for theft, create doubt about their character, destroy their credibility before they can speak, make sure no one believes anything they say. His father had faced the same accusations, and lost everything. Marcus looked at the man in the suit, still standing by the office door like a statue. Who is he? Security consultant, Frank said smoothly, helping me review the footage, assess the situation, determine next steps. There is no situation. I didn't steal anything. Then you have nothing to worry about. Frank leaned back in his chair. But you understand, I have to report discrepancies, store policy, legal requirements. My insurance company requires documentation of any inventory issues. His smile returned, colder than before. I'm sure it'll all get sorted out. Eventually. The threat was clear, crystal clear. Marcus looked at the security footage still displayed on the monitor behind Frank's desk. He saw himself touching the products, moving them, rearranging the display. He understood exactly how his father had been framed 20 years ago. The next 48 hours were the worst of Marcus's life. Frank Harrington moved fast, faster than Marcus expected. A formal complaint was filed with the police department. Suspected theft, inventory discrepancies, suspicious behavior by a juvenile. Marcus's name was attached to the report, his address, his school. Then Frank contacted the school directly, sent a letter to the principal, expressing concern about one of their students, suggesting that Marcus had been involved in suspicious activity at his store, recommending that the school look into the matter. The school called Elaine Wright the next day. She was at work when her phone rang, scrubbing floors in an office building downtown. She had to step outside into the cold hallway to take the call. Her hands were shaking when she heard what they were saying. Her son, accused of theft, under investigation, 3 months before graduation. She left work early, lost those hours of pay she desperately needed, got to the school as fast as a bus could take her, found Marcus sitting in the principal's office, looking smaller than she'd seen him since he was a child, shoulders hunched, eyes down, that notebook clutched in his hands. "This is wrong," Marcus said quietly when he saw her. "I didn't take anything." The principal was sympathetic but firm, professional, careful with her words. "We have to investigate, Marcus. Any accusation this serious from a community business has to be taken seriously. It's policy. But it's not true. Then the investigation will prove that. But until it does, we need to follow procedure." Marcus knew how these things worked. He'd watched his mother deal with false accusations before, seen co-workers fired over misunderstandings that were never properly investigated. Once an accusation was made, it stuck, like tar, like a stain that never fully washed out. Even if it was eventually disproven, the shadow remained. People remembered the accusation, forgot the exoneration, college applications, background checks, job interviews, opportunities. Everything could be destroyed by a lie told at the right moment. And Frank Harrington knew it. That was the entire point. Elaine held her son's hand as they left the school building. Her face was gray with exhaustion and fear. "It's happening again," she whispered. "Just like before. Just like your father." "I know, Mom. I can't watch them do this to you. Not after what they did to Daniel. I can't survive it twice." Marcus squeezed her hand. "They won't. Not this time." "How?" Her voice cracked. "How can you stop them? Your father couldn't stop them. He tried everything. He fought for years, and they destroyed him anyway." Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Dad didn't have what I have." "What do you have?" "Proof. And witnesses." Elaine looked at her son, really looked, and saw something in his eyes she hadn't seen before. Not anger, not desperation, not fear, certainty. That night, Marcus made a list. Everyone who had been in the store on Friday afternoon. Every customer who had witnessed what happened. The woman who bought the first charger. The man who picked up the Bluetooth speaker. The older gentleman with the portable battery. The couple who had been browsing when Frank first laughed at him. 7 customers in total. 7 witnesses who saw everything. They had all watched Marcus touch the products, watched him rearrange the display, and watched those same products sell. Watched the table empty because of legitimate purchases. Watched Frank Harrington ring up every single sale. The problem was finding them. Marcus didn't know their names, didn't have their contact information, didn't know where they lived or worked. But his mother did have something. Connections. Elaine Wright had cleaned businesses on Jefferson Avenue for over 20 years. She knew people. Security guards who monitored cameras and saw everything. Cashiers who processed receipts and remembered faces. Janitors who cleaned offices after hours and heard conversations nobody thought they heard. The invisible network of workers who kept the street running. The people nobody noticed. Just like her. Just like Marcus. She made calls that night. Sent messages. Asked favors from people she'd worked alongside for decades. Within 2 days, she had names. 3 of the customers from Friday had been identified. 1 was a regular at the pharmacy 2 blocks down from Harrington's. 1 worked at the bank across the street. 1 had been visiting her elderly mother, who lived in the apartment above the old bakery. Marcus reached out to each of them, explained the situation, asked if they'd be willing to make a statement about what they saw. All 3 said yes without hesitation. But something else happened during those conversations. Something Marcus didn't expect. Something that changed everything. The woman from the pharmacy recognized Daniel Wright's name immediately. "Daniel Wright," she said. "I remember him. He helped my uncle's hardware store back in the 90s. Saved the business when everyone thought it would close. We always wondered what happened to him. He just disappeared one day." The man from the bank knew the story too. "My father talked about Daniel Wright for years. Said he was the most brilliant person he ever met. Said it was a shame how he got treated. How they ran him out of the neighborhood." The woman visiting her mother started crying when she heard the name. Daniel Wright helped my mother keep her bakery open for 5 more years after my father died. We never forgot him. Never. We always wondered why he vanished. Why nobody would talk about him anymore. They didn't just remember Daniel. They remembered what happened to him. They had watched it happen, watched a good man get destroyed, and they had stayed silent for 20 years, felt guilty about it, wondered if they should have spoken up, should have defended him, should have told the truth. Now they had a chance to make it right. One by one, they came forward, not just the customers from Friday. Others too, people who had known Daniel, people who had watched Frank Harrington build his reputation on stolen ideas, people who had stayed quiet because they were afraid, because they didn't think anyone would believe them, because they thought they were alone. They weren't alone anymore. The network grew. A janitor who had overheard Frank bragging about getting rid of Daniel, a former employee who remembered the original notebooks, a retired store owner who had been pressured to stop hiring Daniel. One by one, they came forward, not for Marcus, for Daniel, for the man who had helped their businesses survive, for the friend they had failed to protect, and for the justice he never received. Frank Harrington had one more card to play, a secret he had kept for 20 years, a document that proved exactly how far he was willing to go to protect what he had stolen. 2 weeks later, Jefferson Avenue Community Center. A meeting had been called, the official topic printed on flyers around the neighborhood, supporting local businesses and addressing youth crime. Frank Harrington was a featured speaker. He had pushed for this meeting himself, contacted the neighborhood association, reached out to local press, made sure everyone knew that he was a concerned citizen trying to protect Jefferson Avenue from troublemakers and thieves. The room was packed that evening. Folding chairs arranged in neat rows across the scuffed wooden floor. Store owners sat in the front. Residents filled the middle sections. A few reporters stood near the back with notepads and recorders. Frank stood at a podium near the front, dressed in his best suit, gold watch polished until it gleamed, hair neatly combed, looking every bit the respected businessman he had pretended to be for decades. "Thank you all for coming," he said, his voice carrying across the silent room. "This community has been my home for my entire life. My father built his business here. I've continued his legacy for nearly 40 years. He paused for effect, let the weight of those years settle over the audience. But lately, I've become concerned about the lack of respect for hard work, for experience, for the people who built this neighborhood with their own hands." A few heads nodded in agreement. "Just last week, I had an incident at my store. A young person who thought he could walk in and tell me how to run my business. When I tried to give him a chance to prove himself, items went missing from my inventory." He shook his head with practiced sadness. "This is what we're facing. This is what we need to address as a community." He continued talking about values, about respect, about protecting what good, honest people had built over generations. Nobody noticed the door in the back of the room open quietly. Nobody saw Marcus Wright walk in, until Frank did. He stopped mid-sentence, his mouth still open, his next word frozen on his tongue. His face changed. The confident mask slipped. Marcus walked slowly down the center aisle, his father's notebook held firmly in his hands. Every eye in the room turned to follow him. Whispers rippled through the audience. "Who is that? Is that the kid he was talking about? What's he doing here?" Marcus stopped about 10 feet from the podium. Calm, quiet, controlled. The room fell completely silent. Frank gripped the edges of the podium, his knuckles turning white. "Young man, this is a private meeting. You need to leave." Marcus didn't move, didn't flinch. "My name is Marcus Wright." His voice was steady, clear, not loud, but it carried through the silent room like a bell. "My father's name was Daniel Wright. Some of you here tonight might remember him." A few people in the audience shifted in their seats, exchanged glances. Older residents, people who had been on Jefferson Avenue long enough to remember that name. 20 years ago, my father helped save over a dozen businesses on this street, including Harrington's Electronics. Frank's hands trembled against the podium. "Young man, this isn't the time or place for." My father developed methods that transformed failing stores into successful ones. He shared his knowledge freely. He believed in this community more than anyone I've ever known. Marcus opened the notebook, and then Frank Harrington stole everything he created. Gasps from the audience, murmurs spreading like fire through dry grass. Frank's face went red. That is a lie. This young man is the one I was just telling you about. The one who stole from my store. The one who... I have proof. Marcus held up a page from the notebook, yellow with age, covered in his father's careful handwriting. This is my father's handwriting. Dated March 1996. 4 months before Mr. Harrington claims to have invented his new store layout. He held up another page. This is a diagram my father created. Every technique Mr. Harrington uses today is documented here, in my father's notes, years before Mr. Harrington registered anything under his own name. The room was buzzing now, people leaning forward in their seats, craning their necks to see the pages, reporters scribbling furiously. When my father tried to speak up about what was stolen from him, Mr. Harrington destroyed him, spread rumors throughout this community, blacklisted him from every business on this street, made sure no one would hire him ever again. Marcus's voice cracked slightly, but he kept going. My father died when I was 12 years old, broken, forgotten, erased from the community he loved and served. He looked directly at Frank, but he left me these notebooks. And he left me the truth. Frank's composure shattered completely. This is ridiculous. I don't have to stand here and listen to accusation from a child. A thief. I have security footage that proves. There are witnesses. A woman stood up in the middle of the audience. The one from the pharmacy. Gray hair. Weathered hands. Voice strong despite her age. I remember Daniel Wright. He helped my uncle's hardware store when no one else would. Everything this young man is saying is true. I watched it happen. Another person stood, the man from the bank. Tall, professional, still wearing his work clothes. My father worked with Daniel Wright. He told me what happened before he died. How Frank Harrington took credit for everything. How he destroyed a good man's reputation. Another person rose. And another. One by one, people stood throughout the room. People who had been silent for 20 years, now speaking, now bearing witness. The room shifted against Frank like a tide turning, murmurs becoming louder, heads turning toward him with different expressions. No longer respect, no longer admiration, something closer to disgust, something closer to recognition of what he truly was. A reporter pushed forward. Mr. Harrington, do you have any response to these allegations? Frank's mouth opened and closed. No words came out. Marcus reached into the notebook one more time, pulled out a folded document, old, yellowed, carefully preserved between the pages for over 2 decades. This is a partnership agreement, Marcus said, holding it up for everyone to see. Dated January 1996, between Daniel Wright and Frank Harrington. The room went dead silent. Not a whisper, not a breath. It states that my father would provide consulting services in exchange for a percentage of increased profits. It acknowledges that the methods being implemented were developed by my father, his intellectual property, his creation. Marcus unfolded the document fully, held it high, and it's signed by Frank Harrington himself. Frank's face went white, the color draining away like water down a sink. That's not... Where did you? This is your signature, Mr. Harrington, your handwriting, acknowledging that my father created the methods you later claimed as your own inventions. Marcus's voice hardened. My father kept the only copy. He hid it in these notebooks, waiting for the day someone would find it, waiting for the truth to finally come out. He looked at Frank. That day is today. The room erupted, people shouting questions, reporters pushing toward the front. Mr. Harrington, do you have any response to these allegations? Frank's mouth opened and closed. No words came out. Marcus reached into the notebook one more time, pulled out a folded document, old, yellowed, carefully preserved between the pages for over 2 decades. This is a partnership agreement, Marcus said, holding it up for everyone to see. Dated January 1996, between Daniel Wright and Frank Harrington. The room went dead silent. Not a whisper, Not a breath. It states that my father would provide consulting services in exchange for a percentage of increased profits. It acknowledges that the methods being implemented were developed by my father, his intellectual property, his creation. Marcus unfolded the document fully, held it high, and it's signed by Frank Harrington himself. Frank's face went white, the color draining away like water down a sink. That's not... Where did you... This is your signature, Mr. Harrington. Your handwriting, acknowledging that my father created the methods you later claimed as your own inventions. Marcus's voice hardened. My father kept the only copy. He hid it in these notebooks, waiting for the day someone would find it, waiting for the truth to finally come out. He looked at Frank. That day is today. The room erupted, people shouting questions, reporters pushing toward the front, camera phones raised, recording everything. Frank Harrington stood frozen at the podium. No more words, no more excuses, no more performance. Just an old man whose lies had finally caught up to him. The partnership agreement proved everything. Daniel Wright wasn't just a consultant. He was a partner. The methods were his intellectual property. Frank's claims of sole ownership were fraud. Decades of profits built on theft. False accusations against Daniel. Attempted accusations against Marcus. A pattern of criminal behavior that could no longer be hidden. Frank Harrington's reputation died in that room. Not from anything Marcus did. From his own signature. His own words. His own arrogance in keeping a document he should have destroyed. The room was still in chaos when Marcus raised his hand. Slowly, the noise died down. People waiting to hear what he would say next. I'm not here for revenge, Marcus said quietly. I'm not here to destroy anyone or send anyone to prison. He paused. Let the words settle. I just want one thing. Everyone waited. I want my father's name acknowledged. I want a sign on that store. Something permanent. Something that tells the truth. That Daniel Wright helped build Harrington's electronics. That his ideas made that business what it is. Marcus looked at Frank. And I want Mr. Harrington to say it. Publicly. In front of this community that my father loved. Frank stared at him. His face gray. Defeated. The arrogance completely gone. The performance finally over. Just an old man facing the consequences of choices he made decades ago. That's all, someone in the audience asked. Marcus nodded. My father believed in this community. He helped people here. He deserves to be remembered for that. Acknowledged for what he contributed. That's all I'm asking. A long pause. Every eye on Frank Harrington. Then, slowly, the old man stepped out from behind the podium. He walked toward Marcus on unsteady legs. Stopped a few feet away. His voice was barely a whisper when he spoke. Daniel Wright helped build my store. His ideas, his methods saved my business. The words seemed physically painful for him to say, but he said them. I should have acknowledged that. Years ago, I was wrong. It wasn't much. It wasn't nearly enough for everything that had been taken. But it was something. Something Daniel Wright never got to hear while he was alive. Marcus nodded once. Thank you. He turned and walked toward his mother, who was standing in the back of the room, tears streaming down her face, her hand covering her mouth. The case against Marcus was dismissed that same week. Every accusation dropped. Every record cleared. Frank Harrington's reputation never recovered. The story spread across Jefferson Avenue and beyond. The newspapers ran articles. Former associates distanced themselves. The store closed 6 months later. But before it did, a small plaque appeared near the entrance, mounted on the red brick wall. Simple brass letters. Asterisk, asterisk, in memory of Daniel Wright, whose vision helped build this business. Asterisk, asterisk. Marcus left his father's notebook open on the empty display table the final day. Daniel's methods visible for anyone who wanted to see them. His handwriting, his ideas, his legacy, finally acknowledged. Then Marcus walked out with his mother, into the evening light on Jefferson Avenue, the street where his father had built something beautiful, the street where that beauty had been stolen, the street where, finally, the truth had been told. 3 weeks later, Marcus came home from school to find an envelope on the kitchen table. Thick, official-looking. Return address from a law firm he had never heard of. He opened it carefully. Inside was a letter and several documents. The letter was brief. Dear Mr. Wright, we represent the estate of Daniel Wright. Recent events have brought to our attention documents in our possession that may be of interest to you. Your father retained our firm in 1998 to preserve certain materials in the event of his death. Per his instructions, these materials were to be released to his next of kin when, in his words, the truth about Jefferson Avenue was finally told. We believe that time has come. Please contact our office at your earliest convenience. Marcus's hands were shaking as he looked at the other documents. Copies, dozens of them, letters, agreements, evidence, not just about Frank Harrington, about other businesses, other stolen ideas, other names. His father had documented more than just what happened to Harrington's electronics. He had documented a pattern, multiple businesses, multiple thefts, multiple people who had built their success on Daniel Wright's brilliance, and then erased him from history. Frank Harrington wasn't the only one. Marcus sat at the kitchen table for a long time, staring at the documents. His father's handwriting, his father's evidence, his father's final gift. There was more work to be done, more truth to uncover, more voices waiting to be heard. Marcus Wright had a choice to make. Let the past stay buried forever, or dig up every secret Jefferson Avenue had ever hidden. He looked at the notebook. His notebook now, his father's notebook, their notebook, and he made his choice. That is a story for another time. Now I need to ask you something. Where are you listening from tonight? What city? What town? What corner of the world? Drop a comment and let me know. Because this story isn't just about one street. It's about every street, every store, every voice that was told to stay quiet, every idea that was stolen, every person who was erased, and every single voice that refused to stay silent. If this story touched you tonight, if you've ever been dismissed because of how you looked, if you've ever had someone take credit for your hard work, if you've ever been told you didn't belong in a room you helped build, then this story is for you. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment below, and make sure you subscribe to this channel, because there are more stories coming, more unheard voices, more buried truths, and I'm going to tell every single one of them. Until next time, stay strong, stay loud, and never let anyone silence your voice.